Well, I would have rather been here than on an airplane. There was much more meatiness happening here. You know, they don't serve you anything on an airplane, except they charge you for the air. My name's Dennis Embry. I'm a developmental and child psychologist by training, and I introduce myself to most people when I'm out gallivanting around the country as a prevention scientist, and people look at me and go, "What's that?" And I say, well, make a short list of all the bad things that you don't want your kids, your grandkids, and other people you care about to have happen to them, and then make another list about all the good things you want those people to have happen to them. And that's my business, is to figure out what we could do across the country, not just at an individual level, but across the country, provinces, states, and counties, etc., to solve major problems. So I'd like to talk about going boldly to where no one has gone before. All right, to go boldly where no scientist has gone before. Some of us in this room have been involved in actually designing things from the ground up when we really didn't know what we were doing. And there's a lot of problems like that in the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about evidence-based kernels and the context of taking the work that Mark has talked about at analyzing past things and then looking at those things that might be useful and have utility, and then also looking at research that's happened on very small units of change that actually often also compose very major projects. Now, how many of you have a toolbox at home? Okay. You got tools in there like you have hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches, things that drill, things that cut, things that pound, all sorts of different tools to accomplish a task. Now, no one of those is going to solve every problem, but a combination of those could be very, very useful in building almost anything that you want to. And Rico and I actually had a conversation. The whole idea of kernels, actually, Rico and I were like disagreeing about something, and I said, well, I want to sort of think about what are the active ingredients that you'll actually denominate like a molecular membrane type of thing. So, but what if we're dealing with a new situation that we don't know what to do about, like the meth epidemic? Some of you are from states where that happened, and there was no evidence-based program for prevention, intervention, or treatment for meth. Are we supposed to ignore the problem? Try that in a political process. But what if it's a rising problem, like foster children with multiple psychiatric disorders? When I'm doing forensic work on case management for those children, I've seen children with on 5, 6, 7 medications, and I'm going, what craziness is this? And then a new setting where there's no evidence, and an after-school setting, like there's actually very little evidence about things that might work in an after-school setting. In fact, we have the 21st Century School Report, which says, yeah, it was actually iatrogenic. Thank you, Tom DeShawn. But an old problem with only descriptive studies. Violent youth offenders re-entering community. I mean, we actually faced this problem of there was not much to guide us on that. There's a major threat to validity which is not often talked about also in evidence-based programs. It is time of history. Things were different when some of those studies happened. And so you may have to deal with the fact. So for example, in the era of most of the home visitation programs that were done almost 20, 30 years ago, we really didn't have the huge crisis of drug use among young moms that we have today. And that really, it's nice to do developmental stuff with children, but if the mom is shooting up every time you try to do a home visit, you have a problem. Now, and then there's some also new trends that are happening that we need to pay very close attention to in the overall context of prevention science and policy. The mission readiness people show that 3 out of 4 of our 17 to 24-year-olds are unfit for military service, and that's not just for obesity, but it's a whole range of things using national data. We have the Wall Street Journal ran an article just before New Year's showing that they audited essentially, I don't know how all of they did this, but essentially 41 million out of 75 million children in 2009 had at least one script for psychotropic medication. And you know what Americans eat today, for example, omega-3 fatty acid versus omega-6 fatty acid versus omega-3 fatty acid, has huge predictive value on many of the things that we're trying to prevent or deal with. By the way, that is not rock crystals, vortexes, or alien abductions. It is science coming out of the National Institutes of Health, and it is exquisitely well done. And then we have, a sleep deprivation that's happening that's affecting all of these behaviors, which is all new, and it's because of cell phones that children have. So, Madam Secretary, there's a big unexpected bug on the problem you want us to solve. So we may have these new things that make it more difficult, and we have to think about what to do. So what are our options? Well, one option is punt, do nothing. That's not going to go down well. You might have to take early retirement. Argue that there's no problem, that the data are wrong. I hear all of these arguments out in the real world. Insist that choosing a program from the National Registry of Effective Programs and Policies and Practices when there are none available. Like, for example, bipolar disorder. What are you going to do? Use use eco-behavioral assessments, evidence-based kernels, and applied behavior analysis designs to evolve a solution, which is the thrust of my talk. This is a sort of an adaptation of something that I wrote in 1984 when I was seconded to as the National Research Advisory Council Senior Fellow in New Zealand. And what we started to think about was going to situations where they were high, medium, and low prevalence rates of the behaviors that were of interest. For example, I was studying how to prevent pedestrian accidents to very young children, which in the 1970s was one of the leading causes of death, and there had only been one experimental study in the entire world, and it killed more kids. So that was a problem. So we looked at various things at the different antecedents. For example, and I'll come to what we then. Then we were looking at the behaviors that were associated that might be differential in those prevalent settings. And then the consequences. What were the reinforces, the negative things, et cetera? And then what are the relational frames? What are the languages used in those different settings that might be indicative of something to do, and then the biophysical and the epigenetic mechanisms that might be operational. That's something new that, not until about the mid-90s did we had to really seriously start to think about those kinds of things. So the physical cues before behavior, the increasing and decreasing rates of duration or intensity of the behaviors. After the behavior, increase or decrease in the future rates of intensity. And then the relational frames, the languages, the rate, et cetera. And the extrinsic or internal biophysical markers, for example, like the omega-6 fatty acid issues. So the physical cues before. Using ATM machines increases drug use relapse. We found that out in the ecological assessments of methamphetamine users. Now, it made perfect sense after we discovered that. Spanking a child with ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder increases the rate of dangerous behaviors, that is, i.e. running into the street. If you Google my name and spanking, you will find 81,000 citations in Google. That's very controversial. Children with sexual, there's something missing there. I don't remember what that is. Verbal praise, verbal praise by a teacher or foster parent flips out children who've had a history of sexual abuse. But that's one of the things we teach all teachers. You need to praise good behavior. But it's often been used as a grooming strategy with children. So there's another way of doing it. You have to desensitize children to this, and there's a way of doing that using written praise rather than verbal praise. So, okay, so here we're at consequences. Teacher sends negative home notes. Teachers everywhere send negative home notes. Now, one of my first graduate students, Mary Lou Kelly, now the professor at Louisiana State University, studied positive home notes. Well, they have essentially the gravitas in terms of effect sizes of having a school social worker. But if you send home a negative note, you increase the rates of child maltreatment. Home visitors make cold rather than warm referrals to ATOD treatment. A warm referral is you take their hand and you drag them over and you sit them down, you fill out the paperwork with them, as opposed to saying, well, you need to call so-and-so or make an appointment. That's a cold. Makes a big difference. Children with behavior problems have low rates of physical activity. One of the things we know now that, for example, that the lack of physical activity increases the ADHD behavior, oppositional defiance, and other kinds of things. We actually understand the neurophysiology of that. So these are some of the things that we have to look at. And then foster kids act, then relational frames. So understanding things, for example, that the kids may be acting out to escape something. These are just some of the ideas that we're looking at. This is doing something odd here. I don't know what. So there we go. All right. So these are the words or the languaging being used. We found, just even saying some kinds of words triggered types of behavior. All right. So what do we do now? So these are three papers that are available on this. The basic paper on the taxonomy of 52 kernels, the earlier paper that sort of lays out the basic idea, and then an earlier paper yet, which is the notion of using small units of change in a repeated behavior, which we call a behavioral vaccine. It's not a program. Typically never a curricula. There may be a lesson on how to do it, like hand washing is a behavioral vaccine. Now, what's a kernel? It's the smallest unit of scientifically proven influence. It must have its own independent studies. It cannot be the result of a meta-analysis may inform us to look for that and having its own unique experimental things. But you got to have a peer-reviewed, published study in a reasonable journal. The underwater basket weaving journal probably won't do. It's indivisible. That is, if you remove any part of it, it no longer works. So, for example, there's an auditory cue. One of the things that Rico and I talked about was the first thing that we were both teaching in a school reform thing was a visual auditory signal for quiet and attention in the classroom. So neither one of us had really noted it. But the reason we did it was if the teachers didn't do that, nothing else happened properly. And there are actually independent studies on that. If you take away the auditory thing, it doesn't work as well. If you take away the visual thing, it doesn't work as well either. It produces quick and easily measured change that can grow much bigger. Now that proximal change is critical to look for and understand. One of the things that I believe, I can't necessarily prove yet, but it is apparent to me that the programs with the highest effect sizes are the ones that have measurable, clear, proximal results that you can see and hear and feel in real time. If you can't do it, then they tend to have weaker things and people get very wobbly with the implementation because they're not getting feedback if it's making a difference. The kernel can be used alone or in combination. It's an active ingredient in many programs. They may spread by word of mouth, although we may not have noted them. But you can often tell by looking at the bibliography of the things. For example, timeout is in virtually every single evidence-based program for parenting. There is not one single randomized trial published of timeout alone that I found. There are 47 applied behavior analysis studies, however. It can be separated by word of mouth, modeling, and non-professionals. That's very good because one of the problems is of generalization. If it requires, a heart transplant to implement this thing, then the survivability of it is not likely to be high, and you want other people to pick up and use pieces of it to promote generalization. There's a terrific article written by Don Baer and Trevor Stokes called The Implicit Technology of Generalization to understand that as very things. And then these can address historical disparities. So there's 4 types here: an antecedent kernel, which happens before, an reinforcement that happens after. A physiological kernel directly changes the physiology. So, for example, some of you have heard of positive alternative thinking skills, for instance. That includes a little kernel called turtle breathing, which is nasal breathing, alternate things that actually changes physiology and then changes behavior. It has 2 peer-reviewed publications. The first one was 1976. A relational frame, for example, in the way we are now using we have, I don't know, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 classrooms now using the PACS Good Behavior Game, which is the good behavior game, but we added things in order to improve the implementation and the generalization of it in our Hopkins work. And that now, for example, uses the language of PACS as the good that you're trying to do, and that helps a bunch of things. And spleens are the disruptive behaviors. So you don't have to name each thing. They're all categorically, and all you have to do is look at a kid. Karen's been bad. Karen, was that a PACS or a spleen? automatic generalization. And that comes out of the relational frames come out of the work of Steve Hayes. So kernels are the building blocks of behavior change. There are 52. We actually stopped there. Oh, there are many more than that, but 52 is kind of cool. We could use that as a metaphor, as playing cards. And, you know, of course, how many games can you play with 52 cards? Almost an infinite variety. Okay, and you can use a planning model for change. You can say kernel 1 and kernel 2 and see the proximal effects, and then build this out and look at the modular effects as you do these things. This is a public health case study of using 3 kernels doing reward and reminder. Reward and reminder was invented by my colleague Tony Bigland, and we took it to scale in 2 whole states. So it has a relational frame. We do the right thing by not selling tobacco or alcohol. We have mystery shoppers. Mystery shoppers don't look for the bad, they look for the good. Then we have a public posting kernel. So there you go, is reduced access in 2 whole states using SINAR data. Using YRBS data, we have actually reductions in any smoking in the last 30 days and everyday smoking. You can use the kernels they can often cross boundaries, so that the prize bowl, which is also the mystery motivator in a different thing, can be used intervention, targeted, and universal. These allow you to do things. The basic idea of the research designs comes from very old things, from all the way back to Claude Bernard for single subject designs, diabetes. This is an example of a multiple baseline thing, and you actually can measure the actual standard error of the behavior as it happens and understand the variability and the sources of variability. This is the safety study with very high-risk ADHD oppositional defiant kids and teaching them not to go into the street. This is a reversal design example where you can actually see, does this thing turn things off and on? These are various examples. This is the prize bowl thing, for example, showing which could be applied to the nurse-family partnership or home visiting for people who are using alcohol, tobacco, or drugs. A very powerful thing that cost about $200 to do. There's a logic model. I hate logic models, long-lived logic models. If kernels are so good, how come you're just hearing about them? Well, how long have humans been carrying heavy objects? For a long time. How long have people known about a lever? A long time. How long have people known about a handle? A long time. How long have people known about a wheel? Less. It wasn't until 1990 that was invented. So sometimes things take a while, even though the knowledge is there. So, thank you very much.